Hello, everyone. I can see loads of people starting to trickle in the chat. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Rebecca. I'm a member of the team here at Edge Tier. I can see some people in the chat. I can see Anna for working for Me Paris. I can see Lydia at Panzer Spain. I can see Owen. I can see Gina. Thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. If you haven't yet, introduce yourselves down there in the chat so we can get to know you. We have a packed agenda, lots to discuss, so I'm just going to jump straight into it for everyone. Everyone on this call has one thing in common, and that is that you're sitting on a mountain of customer data. Support teams at your companies hear the real problems every day from customers. So it's not collecting the data that's the issue, it's making sense of it and knowing what to do with it. I'm sure you've got tickets, chats, emails, calls, all full of valuable signals from your customers, but that insight is often trapped in those systems. So it's either hard to access, hard to trust, or stuck behind really slow manual processes. And without a clear view into why your customers are reaching out, it's hard to take meaningful action. So that is what we're going to explore today through TUI's story. So we'll see how they moved from insights hidden in support conversations and having to make decisions with gut feel to driving real business-wide change backed by data from customer interactions. At the end of this 45 minutes hour, you're going to hear how TUI uncovered hidden contact drivers and moved from manual tagging to real-time AI-powered insights. We're going to talk about the real cost of poor visibility and how fixing that opened up huge impact across the business for TUI. Excuse me. There'll be some practical examples too, like how automation helped reduce contacts for TUI and save over 100,000 hours without adding any extra headcount. And then we'll wrap with some extra tips you can take away too, even if you're not using any softwares. So that was a lot of information. That's why we're going to leave it by the end of this. But before we get into the conversation, I want to chat through who is joining us today. So we have Shane Lynn on the call with us, who's CEO and co-founder at Edge Tier. An engineer by training, Shane is a data guru, spending his time across product strategy and making sure our customers are getting real value from what we do here at Edge Tier. Shane's got a PhD in machine learning and control engineering. And before diving into the world of customer service, he applied his skills everywhere from actual rocket science to telecoms to autonomous vehicles. So Shane really knows his stuff. Also, really excited to welcome our guest speaker today, who is Jack Orbell from TUI. Jack started his career in travel at just 17. He started working in TUI's retail shops while he was studying. And he actually has a degree in forensic science, which, as it turns out, is the perfect training for getting to the bottom of customer issues. He began in the contact center as a customer service agent and then moved into quality and now works in the continuous service improvement team, where he's using insights and data to drive real meaningful change across the business at TUI. So welcome, Jack. Here's the two familiar faces you'll be seeing for the next hour. But before we get into the conversation with Jack, I want to start by just pulling back a little and giving some context with Shane. So I'll pull you up onto the stage with me, Shane. There you go.
Hello, thank you.
So Shane, you've been working in this space for years, so you're really familiar with working with retail and travel teams who deal with this kind of stuff. So let me ask you, when you talk to leaders in customer support and in customer operations, what are the main challenges you hear around them using their data to drive change across the business?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we've been working in this space since probably 2016 or 2017. And the problems that we see today, I would say, are the same as the problems we saw then. So when myself, Bart, and Kieran co-founded the company, we had a background in data science and analytics. And when we entered into the contact center space, we just saw a space with a ton of data saved in multiple various systems, lots of complexity, lots of real-time requirements, and just a general challenge of using that data to make better decisions. So a ton of hunch-driven, loudest voice in the room saying, I think we have a problem with our payment system, but no real numbers behind that. And that's a really difficult place to be, because how do you prioritize? How do you know you're working on the best things? And those challenges are still the same problem today. So hard to get data out, hard to go beyond just, looking at the numbers and looking at the handling times and looking at the volume of interactions. Particularly difficult to get into what our customers talking about, and loads of manual work, extracting, reading things, Excel pivot charts. We've seen some Excel sheets from hell coming out of contact centers. So that movement from quantification into quantification and moving from hunch to data driven is still the challenge that we see today.
Okay. And obviously, we're going to be talking today about how we can use AI to help us with some of those challenges. And obviously, AI is a very big buzzword that we're hearing everywhere at the moment, especially in boardrooms. So, what does practical and useful AI actually look like for contact centers trying to solve those challenges?
Yeah. So I made solemn promises today that this wasn't going to be a massive sales pitch, right? So I'm going to stick to those promises. And for all of our listeners today, hopefully they're breathing a sigh of relief. And I think AI, we're in such a hype cycle for AI right now. If you go onto LinkedIn, I mean, everyone who's anyone now is telling you that, you should be operating with 10% the number of people because AI is taking everything. And I do think it's probably overhyped at the moment. And AI, in my mind, I mean, before it was AI, it was machine learning. Before it was machine learning, it was statistics. Before it was statistics, it was just maths, and that hasn't changed that much. Although there has been some changes recently. But really, it's just software at the moment, and it's becoming more and more a part of the software. And I
Mhm.
suppose there is a spread of maturity for contact centers where they dabble and then slowly get more and more, I suppose, into AI and start to use it for more and more. But that starts off with, as simple as autocorrect and checking the text that people are writing in chats, or checking the tone of communication. It moves into agent assistance. I mean, the quintessential application is obviously some deflection with chatbots, either voice or text, and the use of machine learning models within your organization to spot issues with churn or dissatisfaction. Um, I do think there's definitely been genuine innovation and changes in the technology of late, and that has led to an increased ability of computers to understand written and spoken words, and that leads to a whole set of new use cases.
Mhm.
But not everyone is there yet, and I do think I would approach with caution some of the messages out there that are saying this is going to just automate everything and take away everything. It's not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Now that could accelerate further, but I think the real practical examples here are just using software intelligently, applying AI where it's needed in measured circumstances, and getting real tangible benefits from that at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. That's great context. Yeah, like you said, this isn't a sales pitch, so I'm not going to ask you any more questions,
Yeah,
Shane. I'll let you bring all of that to life by talking to Jack. So yeah, Jack, we're really excited to have you on to share TUI's story. And I'll let you take it from here, Shane.
brilliant. Thanks a million, Rebecca.
No problem.
This is all very smooth for our first ever webinar, so
You're doing really
it's
well.
okay. It's okay for everyone in the audience to be impressed. That's okay. Okay, so Jack, I want to make you the center of the show here, right? So Jack works on the continuous improvement team at TUI, which we've worked with now for a number of years. Really interesting setup. And it might be good, Jack, maybe if we start off just to give the audience a view of what does customer service look like at TUI? How is it set up? What's the level of complexity, and how you got into it and how you've made that journey?
Yeah, I mean, TUI itself is one of the Europe's leading travel companies, right? We handle over 200,000 contacts across multi channels. So we've got calls, emails, chats. So the level of complexity there is obviously quite high, but then we throw more amongst it. So we have over 7 languages. We have teams in multiple regions. So we have offices in the UK. We've got offices in Egypt, in Amsterdam. So, the complexity lies obviously there. And then ultimately from there, when we were looking at sort of life before Edge Tier, it was also very difficult that we had no centralized way of collecting or analyzing any data across each region, and every region had its own process of obviously being able to report and collect that data itself. So the level of complexity was quite high,
Yeah,
and
that is
ultimately.
extreme, right? And was everyone using the same? Was everyone using the same tools to communicate with customers at least, or was it different there as well?
Well, the tools itself, in terms of how we work, we were ultimately using the same, software, etc. But in terms
Well,
of
that's
how
good to start. It could have been worse, so
well, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But even booking systems though, that they were different. So we were using the same potentially like channel software, so telephony and voice and chat with our customers over Digi. But we were all using different booking systems. We were all using different ways of reporting. There was no centralized way and unity between anything that we did. And that's something that we're looking to change in the
Okay.
future. And ultimately that comes down to obviously this as well.
Okay. And then just for setting the scene there as well, like, what is the quantum of agents there roughly, and the quantum of passengers that you need to service in terms of the total volume for our audience?
Millions of customers a
Yeah.
year across different regions. There's a higher proportion potentially in the UK versus our Nordic region, but still, it's very like for like. And in terms of staffing, we've got thousands and thousands of different people that are driving this organization in different areas of the business. And ultimately, we all have different ways of working, and are all working on different things to ultimately bring that one prize to our customers.
And it's not, it's, I think we've worked across a number of travel companies here at Edge here, and I can't say that I think, yeah, I think TUI, the breadth of products that you also offer and the on the ground support as well adds this additional layer of complexity and urgency to the customer care. It's not just like pre-booking and post-booking, but there's an on the ground rep. There's, buses and transport and hotels and flights. It's truly, yeah, a behemoth of a company to kind of try and manage from a customer service
So
perspective.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Especially when you have your own airline, you have your
Yeah,
own ground staff, you have obviously your teams in pre-travel, you have your teams in after travel, you have your teams obviously on the ground in resort. There's multiple different jobs
yeah.
that all work together.
And
And
whole companies that we also sell to that are just one of those aspects.
yeah,
The
absolutely,
fact
absolutely.
the fact that this was
And
one customer service organization is hard to
yeah,
fathom.
absolutely.
Um, okay, so from that, then in that, like, I suppose a year or two back, what did life look like? Like, how did you analyze that data, or did you make decisions based on the data coming from customer service, or how did it all work?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we worked, it was again, I've touched upon it there, that we were all working in different ways. And we had what we called a sentiment form, which our agents were filling in after every interaction. And again, each region didn't have a sentiment form. Some would be doing it over sort of a month period or 3 month period. Some would be doing it on a regular basis. It would be sort of full time, shall we say. But ultimately, it was subjective as to what would be inputted into that form. If you've got a multiple amount of different topics within one call, an agent only has one to choose, right? So obviously, it was very difficult to really quantify that data itself. And also, every call was being submitted. Agents have
Mm.
got a whole host of things to worry about when they're dealing with our customers, and then to then ask them to do one other thing on a call itself. It was quite difficult. Um, so the response rates were obviously quite low. And obviously from there, being able to quantify that data again was time consuming. It was inconsistent. It was, how do we get a buying on something that we haven't got 100% of? And that made it quite difficult to be able to even share a story about a particular topic. And some of the stuff that we were receiving was quite high level. If we were to say, we've got an issue with payment, what does that actually mean? What does
Yeah.
a payment issue mean? There's a multiple of different reasonings as to why a customer calls around payment or amendment or cancellation, but what is that underlying factor as to why they are calling, and why potentially they can't self-serve, or why can't they get that information from our documentation or website? So yeah, it was tough. It was tough.
Okay, so all of the I suppose the analysis was based on the contact reasons left by the agents, and then a
Yeah.
manual review of those, right? Like a look through. And I
Yeah.
think that's like, I don't know if your experience was the same, but almost every contact center we worked with, it's, the top one on the list and the other bracket are the two most popular two most popular
Yeah.
choices, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean the other category is always the one that's second on the list or top on the list.
Yeah,
Is it? And it's going through the forms previously. With that other, you categorize your main intents that you think are right. It's all based on gut feeling. But then you're going through freeform text to try and find that other, and
Yeah.
that
And
it was tough.
and the incentives there, I think this is true of all contact centers, but the incentives there aren't, not particularly clear. I mean, for the continuous improvement team, obviously accurate tagging is, the be all and end all. I mean, how can you make decisions without it? But for an individual contact center agent who is rated on customer satisfaction and how fast they can get through the contacts, pick another is a good answer for that, right? So that's a really common difficulty. Never mind the challenges of managing that in a multilingual environment with different teams, with different definitions for what payment is, and add all that on top, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned there about multilingual as well. Is it's you have to have then a number of different native speakers to be able to do the sentiment forms as well and read them. And then you've got a multiple. Then you've got a group of seven of you trying to do different languages, and each of you will have your own way of being able to quantify that data as well. So, that was
Yeah.
another difficult part.
And at that time, did the continuous improvement team exist, or has that been a new
At
initiative?
the lateral end of the sentiment forms. I mean, CSI, continuous service improvement, launched 3 years ago, and I've been in role 2 years. So we had the sentiment forms there, and I mean, for me, I've it took me maybe 4 weeks to try and get something, and then at that
Wow.
point, then you're trying to make that visual for somebody that's not been working with the data, and the visibility of it all was quite hard.
And the setup there is actually interesting, maybe to the listeners and kind of people coming in as well. In that, like, I think, how to put this, I think the most successful customers we've worked with are those who are making these continuous improvements to their customer experience and customer service, and actually having a like you're gifted really in that you have a dedicated set of people whose role is let's continuously improve things, right? So maybe give us a couple of sentences on that team when you joined it. What's the remit and how does it work, and what's your like control, or how's that team set up? Because it's a really valuable, obviously, resource for TUI to have.
No, absolutely. So there's three of us in the team, including myself, and ultimately we are looking to see how we can reduce contact by understanding the contact reason. We're also looking to obviously improve efficiency. So, we say a lot around, what are our customers calling about, but we're also speaking to our agents and our teams on the ground from a business side. And we're looking to improve, obviously, their experience as well. So not only the customer experience, but also our agent experience. So how can we make processes more efficient? How can we reduce a time that it takes to amend a holiday or to cancel a holiday, wherever it may be? So it's not always obviously customer focused, but
Of course.
obviously we have a lot of obviously contact reason coming through. And we're ultimately looking at ways in which we can improve. We can always improve, right? So whether we improve the information that we have within our FAQs, can we improve the way that our customer can self-serve? And with all of this, we're trying to improve the efficiency, trying to improve the customer satisfaction, and ultimately with all of this increase sales. So there's a lot that we do as a team, but you don't necessarily have to be dedicated to continuous service improvement to have that mindset of CSI. You can embed it in your own roles now, of always wanting to strive and always wanting to do better.
Yeah, of course. No, it's a really valuable mindset. I think, yeah, it's one of the areas we really work on, that like helping those types of teams use data to inform the next couple of steps that you're doing is just so valuable. So we've kind of described there the pre area, right? So obviously this came to a breaking point, right? It was like you just described a 4 week process to do some analysis. So was there a certain point where you said, you know what, we need to sort this, and what drove that?
What drove sort of what the change?
Yeah, the drive to like look for a better approach here.
Well, rising contact volumes, with unclear drivers, ultimately, which obviously drove the change itself, and looking for a better approach as such. Um, we spent valuable time trying to quantify the data when you ask the question, do you want to spend time collating the data, quantifying that data, or do you want to spend time fixing that data, and fixing those customer problems? So I think obviously a bit of a reflection on Time management was probably another one as well, to understand
Yeah.
obviously where can we better focus our time when we're working from 9 till 5. Do you want to spend half your day looking through Excel sheets that you mentioned previously, or do you want to try and have the right people looking at the right topics?
Yeah.
And we needed to act faster. By the time that you got to a point where you could showcase the data, you've probably then got another driver coming through, or you've gone from sort of not being in peak period to being in peak period, where you then got a different driver coming through. So, I think we needed to act faster and not weeks later.
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
think that was the big change.
Yeah. Great. So it's okay to do some small advertisement now, but how did you start turning the raw data into something useful, Jack? Or what was the step there?
Well, I mean, obviously, the change itself, we ultimately have worked with the teams at Edge Tier, with the interactions that we have, and obviously, how do we make that from raw data to something was obviously keywords, key phrases, and understanding obviously the topics of which we're sort of focusing on, and obviously from there you'll be able to then with the sort of the keywords and topics, you can then understand obviously what is payment meaning. Is payment meaning that you've got customers coming through wanting to make a payment, or is there payment errors, or is there direct debit issues, for example? So understanding obviously the customer sentiment and their keywords at which they're using ultimately allowed us to have the high and low level view of obviously the
Yeah.
levels in contact reason to be able to obviously make that change.
Yeah. And it's that combination I think is great where, I think technology has advanced to a point where the lower level and detailed tagging of individual contacts can take the entire conversation into account, and at the same time also look at the customer emotions related with that. So bringing those two together is really meaningful.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, obviously, with edge tiers tools that you have within the software itself, obviously we can see that. And then you also obviously have the spotlight feature, which ultimately goes into further depth. So we can, ultimately look at check-in queries, at which from there we can then use the spotlight, which summarizes was it 200 interactions, and obviously from there, we can then it then gives you a over 200 interactions. What is it that customers are coming through for, and splitting that into percentages, and with that we can then detect the root causes as to why customers are calling. So that's obviously a great feature that we use a lot.
And
um,
Jack, who's doing that then? Actually, just to from our perspective, and it's interesting for us too. In your organization, is that limited to the customer kind of service improvement team, or like is there other users?
Potentially it was, because you've got teams that have got different remits. They're dealing with their own daily tasks, and to say to them, you need to do this and X, Y, and Z, and it takes this amount of time, then it probably was. But now, no. Everybody has access. Everybody can use the tool based on obviously the training at which we've provided, and obviously that you guys have provided. And obviously from there the teams now can focus their attention on their particular areas. They now have the information at a snap of a finger. They've got all of the different emotions a customer may provide within interaction itself. So now we have obviously teams that are looking at we're improving across other areas of the business that we potentially may not have touched before. And
Yeah,
as I sort of
great.
mentioned before, everyone can have that CSI mindset in their own role, even if they don't have the title. And this is where this has obviously been able to be embedded from, that people can now take some of the root causes into their daily tasks.
Yeah, and I think that's brilliant. I think just what you said there, embedding this into like other roles. That I actually think this is one of the things that the new advancements in AI have done. They're almost democratizing the ability of people to do more intelligent analysis that just wouldn't have beforehand, because beforehand it was in reality, an Excel sheet, an extraction, a CSV file, or a JSON dump, and just having tools where you can, if your organization allows, and I think the best ones do, where the product team can start to look at the customer service data, or the regulatory team can look at the
Mhm.
customer service data, and just getting more and more of those people who want to find problems and improve them, getting that data at their fingertips. And I don't know, my experience as a data scientist has always been that, the faster the iteration cycle there in terms of asking a question of data, getting the answer and repeating to find a hypothesis, the faster that iteration is, the more questions you will ask, So where you have to go and ask someone to do an extract and get them to do an analysis, and 2 weeks later they come back with the answer, then you ask them again and they go back 2 weeks later. That's very different from log in, click a few buttons, get the answer, and then just repeat, rinse, repeat. You're doing weeks of work potentially in a couple of days and ultimately making better decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've got an example of that. I mean, I was speaking to our web design team this week, our content team, and as soon as they heard about the tool, we're still trying to spread the knowledge across, obviously, too, that we have obviously this tool at our hands. But they mentioned that they've been waiting for this. They've never been able to have any information or any insight previously, and now they have it. So there's teams now that have never even looked at
Oh,
continuous
well.
improvement or not had the opportunity to. And now, like our web content teams are now like, oh, eager to view the tool and improve in that aspect as well. So, some people have never had the
Let's talk to
opportunity.
our sales targeting team.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But
Yeah.
there's some people that there's roles that have been gasping at the opportunity to be able to have this, and now that we have.
Yeah, great. So one of the questions in the you see a few questions coming in there, which is great. So keep them coming, guys. But Simon, I noticed there. Curious to understand more about how you practically use the insights and deployed these successfully. Do you have any early wins or moments, Jack, in mind that like where this clicked and you actually made a change to a process, or maybe give a view of what that looked like? Maybe I think anecdotes are a really good way to kind of make this memorable, but like both what you did and maybe the impact, just so people. And I know in TUI the impacts are so big, right, because the volumes are so large. But I think that makes it fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously when we had the tool, I think it really opened up, our eyes in some of the different areas that we've potentially never been able to look at before, and particularly around direct debit. There we have the option for our customers to pay by direct debit on a monthly basis. But when we had the tool, we were then obviously able to get deeper and meaningful insights. We noticed that our customers were calling us about receiving documentation around a refund, but we'd never seen this before. This is the first time we've looked into it. So as we go deeper into the analysis within Edge Tier itself, we then realised that customers were receiving refund notifications when their direct debit failed. So in this instance, customers they were thinking, oh, buzzing, I've got a refund, but really it was the payment actually hadn't gone through. So they actually it was it
They were
was
booking the
it
next
was
trip.
it was the other way around. Yeah. So obviously with this in mind, that we've then understood the root cause, we've then actioned upon it, and then obviously since then, we've mitigated that particular problem. But payment as a whole, we had what 40% of our contact was payment related in some way, and then obviously since we've seen a lot of quick wins, a lot of sort of long-term solution wins. But with that in mind, we've cut the total contact volume by 7%. So, not everything has to be a yearly project. In this instance, it was a couple of weeks, a couple of days. And your quick wins add up to long-term wins at the same time.
Yeah.
But that's just sort of one example that as soon as we had the tool, we were able to rectify and ultimately give that customer a better experience moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. And like at TUI volumes, that's obviously, nearly 20,000 calls a week. So there's like a huge payback there. It's great. Okay. And the other piece then, I suppose, is the more direct time saving on agents from contact tagging, right? So I think it's kind of an obvious one to bring up, but I
Yeah,
believe you've nearly transitioned away from relying on agents to label stuff.
yeah, it's gone. Yeah,
That's
so
done.
it's
Yeah.
it's,
Okay.
it's already gone. So yes, obviously the sentiment forms that I'd mentioned obviously at the start that they were taking what 30, 40 seconds, per interaction, and the customer wasn't necessarily on the phone, but it was time that they weren't taking the next call, and that's where we were losing value. But since obviously the implementation, we've removed them, and because we no longer need them, and ultimately there we saved 30 seconds per contact, which led to 100 hundreds of thousands of hours saved, annually. So, that was sort of probably our quick win. But also, I think the quickest win out of everything, yes, you have to do after you see the data, but having the data readily available was the quickest win, right? We've never
Yeah.
had that before. And I think, having the access to the information, to information that we've not had before, I think that was our fastest win and quickest win.
Yeah, that's great. There is a question there around customer service agents, right? So obviously we're, as well as the contact reason tagging, there's an element here that we're looking at around, using these AI insights and using kind of automated contact um, reviews to look at agent performance. And I see a message from Gina around like, how have you found the customer service agents adapting to the new data-led approach? Like, do they struggle? Did people resist this at all? Like, or has it been open arms? How did you manage that change internally?
Open arms,
Oh, good.
from our our customer service agents, you're taking one job away from them with this approach. Ultimately we were still collecting data one way or another, whether one being not so good fast, but yeah, I mean the customer service agents have adapted really well. Their job has ultimately become easier. So it also means now that we've lost that 30 seconds, but we've given that 30 seconds back to our agents to be able to have that valuable time with our customers itself. Um, so no, there was no real struggle with
Okay,
change that we've ever had.
that's great. Yeah, it's open-minded approach there. The I know you've an anecdote there around baggage as well, something we all can associate with travel partners, but might be interesting to look at that customer pain point and how you looked at it.
Yeah, so I mean, there was a couple of issues with baggage itself, really. So, you know, as a company, we don't always just sell our own airline. We put our packages with alternative airlines, which obviously from there they have different baggage rules. They have, each airline is slightly different in one way or the other. But when we sort of looked into the insight of baggage itself, we understood that it was a real problem that potentially we never knew before. And it was one of those ones that was just underlying and it was just there. And we could see that baggage was a topic, but I go back to that point where baggage is a big topic. So what is it that our customers are calling about? Now we came to the realization, and it was in reference to sort of the lack of information that we were providing, and the inconsistency of information that we were also providing our customers in the whole booking journey. It wasn't just one area within the booking journey. It was across sort of each different touch point. Now, obviously, with EdgeTier, we were able to understand obviously the cost value. And the value that we sort of estimated was around 3 to 4 million a year, across all of our regions, to be able to interact with our customers around this piece, this pain point. And you think, oh, baggage, why is it so difficult? When you're within travel, you just probably just get it. But when you've got customers that potentially only do one holiday a year, it's alien language to them. When you're talking about check-in and baggage and all host of different things. And obviously from there, we've been able to obviously tackle the root cause, and ultimately implement actions aiming to reduce that customer contact going forward. And that is probably one of our biggest findings.
Jack, you're telling me we should move to some kind of different pricing model based on return on investment. That's what you're telling me. I'll need to talk to Barton Commercial around that as a gamble.
I,
We
I
said,
actually said 300,000 it was
oh,
saving.
is that? Oh, sorry, I misheard. Very good. Okay, great. So I think we've covered a lot there. I think there's a couple of questions there around like which initiatives or how you did that, and I think you've answered it around reducing contacts. And I think once you get like a view of what contacts are driving, and where an automated view that's consistent and uniformly applied across all the languages and markets, then you can really quantify both the topics that are happening, the level of frustration that customers are having within those topics, and then the cost for those topics by tying that back to an actual AHT, right? So you can quickly build a prioritized list and say, from the loudest voice in the room saying, it's payment, you can turn and say, well, actually, payment is significant, but, look at baggage. It's twice as big, and it's something we can address. So really interesting to see how to go through that. I want to move us on slightly just before Rebecca comes back on lessons for other teams and other people, because I think, and I realize we're becoming part of this problem. I just think everyone is shouting about like AI, you need to be doing all this magic stuff. And it is bombarding. Like there's a lot out there at the moment. I don't want people to feel I want to give some practical help to people who are just being bombarded with these messages. I'm bombarded with the same, right? I should be like running companies on AI only, and what are you doing? Still writing emails, right? So it's worse, I think, if you're running a customer service company. So I want to be practical here. So what would you say to people, I suppose, if they have the data and they kind of feel they have it, they realize there's value in these conversations, but they can't use them the way they want to? What would you kind of give advice there?
I think one of the main ones is that you're not alone. We were in the same place at one stage. Start by finding one pain point, and exploring what's already available in your conversations with customers itself, right? So there is information out there within your interactions that you would be able to use. And I think raw data is only useful when it's turned into clear, actionable insight, right? So, as you mentioned around AI, but automation can bridge that gap. And ultimately, it did bridge the gap for us. And I think that's one of the big wins for us, that automation did bridge that gap for us.
And I think there is it's not like the old methods didn't work, right? It's not like still taking 300 individual conversations from your contact center platform and reading through them and manually applying labels doesn't give insights. And actually, I think that's a really useful tool for people just to do that grunt work so that they can justify later, well, imagine if we did this on thousands of contacts. Look what we got just from doing 300 manually, and it took a day. But imagine we were doing this every day, every hour, every minute in real time. I think it's easy to scoff and say like, oh God, imagine reading things manually. You can't be stuck in that old Stone Age. But very often in projects when we start with like, what do you think is actually automated? What's the actual problem? Let's just go read some contacts. And I think that's still worthwhile reminding yourself that not everything has to be the,
No,
gee whiz moment.
100%. And I mean, we actioned in the old way of working, right? So I didn't just sit on my hands and wait for this day that we would have edged here and we would have automation and we were, I
had the dream come true, Jack. You weren't just TikTok.
Exactly. So, ultimately the Excel version, the track, and listening to contacts if you have that opportunity, and sitting with your agents, that's also a sort of a real quick win as well, because your agents are dealing with it on a daily basis, right? They have a lot of insight into what they discuss on a daily basis. So, speaking to your agents, listening to calls, transcripts, however you sort of retrieve that information from your interactions will ultimately assist you moving forward, and obviously create some actionable insight to be able to obviously move forward and improve.
Yeah. So within TUI, then, once you actually made, I think you kind of talked on a bit of it about alignment between departments. And when you made this insight, is there a noticeable change? Like, as in, obviously within your own work, do you see other changes though?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you've got a unified approach. You've got when you're speaking to people around sort of different contact reason, it comes back to you're all now speaking the same language of data. You're not sort of saying, well, this is the way that I did it. This is, and you're all sort of speaking the same language. You're getting it all from the same platform. So you can then sort of, that can be sort of your, you've got data behind you that is everybody's talking the same stuff. And obviously from here, it allowed, obviously we had the obviously the change and starting to inform other teams. We were able to resolve issues faster, and obviously it became more clearer when it was backed by data, and obviously from there, I've mentioned it many a times, but it's a unified force rather than the blocker, having that data available. So yeah, I mean, that's how we sort of shared it to the teams, and the buy-in that we've had in from the teams itself has been incredible. and having that available.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a forward-thinking organization that can do that as well.
Mm.
One question I will take from the audience there, and I think we're going to go through a few more of them in a sec, but one was like, how long did it actually take to start seeing results once you started getting these systems in place? Is that like days, weeks, months?
Depends on what is uncovered, right? So, I mean, for
Yeah,
us, it was quite quick. I mean, I mentioned obviously previously around the direct debit issue. That was weeks, but potentially you may see it in days, and it depends. Obviously, we started seeing results quite quickly. We were already gaining valuable insights from the automated tagging and all the other sort of different tools that you guys have, and obviously within there you're able to obviously understand what the customers are calling for. But in terms of obviously us, we saw it in weeks, but you may see it in days, and then obviously from there, we were able to then fix
yeah,
problems and fix issues to provide the better customer experience. But as I said previously as well, the better agent experience, because we didn't not only fix front end, we also fixed back end. And obviously from there, we were able to then obviously move forward and continuously improve.
yeah. And actually, interesting you mentioned the automated tagging because we have two questions there about the automated tagging. One from Ivan, sorry, Ivan. Just saying, curious to learn more about your transition to automated tagging. Could you walk us through the process? Like, at what point did you feel confident? Because it is, and I remember, this was quite a project. There was a step though where you said, "All right, agents are no longer doing this, and we're gonna realize this saving, right? But we're gonna rely on this new technology that didn't exist only 2 or 3 years ago." But at what point, or what did that process look like for you to feel confident on the accuracy there?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it comes from testing. So how it originally started for us was obviously we were using what we were using from a sentiment perspective. We had a base where we had the topics of which we were seeing from a sentiment perspective. We obviously then provided descriptions, and we were then sort of looking at understanding what does it mean by cancellation full, what does it mean by cancellation partial, and really understanding obviously what those interactions mean. From there, obviously, we started to obviously pass them over and work with Edge Tier and understand obviously how automated tagging was working. And I think it comes with time. You try, test, and learn, and I think that's probably the three key words really. You do your first lot of testing, and it may not be as you'd expect or want, but then you do it again, and you keep continuously working, and ultimately you get to a point where yeah, this is delivering what we wanted it to deliver. And obviously from there, when we had, when we're looking at transcripts and we're seeing that we're reading them ourselves and saying, oh yeah, that is direct debit and it's been tagged and tagged correctly, etc. That's then providing us with obviously the trust. And then also not only just the trust in us, but the trust from the other teams as well.
Yeah, of course.
And obviously
I think
from
it's
there.
worth for the audience to understand how that process works effectively. Effectively, we look at the entire conversation, so transcribed from voice to text, or a chat conversation, or an email thread. Um, and the system uses large language model prompts that describe each possible topic that it could be, and the system compares the conversation to a list of several hundred possibilities and then fits it to the best one and uses a prompt to both summarize and then determine what category here should we work with. And in this case, we have very travel and TUI specific categories. And as Jack said, that's an iterative process. The first time you do it, it's a bit hairy, right? And like, what's the difference between a full cancellation and a half cancellation, or a flight seat change versus a flight seat upgrade? But once you go through, it's usually kind of 3 to 5 iterations. You end up with this hammered down list, and then you've got this consistency that you just didn't have before with customer service agents, which I think is the big change. One question there from Megan around dealing with many data sources. Like, how did you deal with all the different sources, call logs, surveys? Actually, in your case, you had chat, and I think this is a really common problem. I think everyone's dream is that you walk into a contact center and all the data is in one place. But I think, like TUI, most of our customers, it's my surveys are over here in Qualtrics, and my emails are over here in Salesforce, and my calls are over here in Five9. And that's one of the things we helped, I think, with bringing all that together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not personally close enough to the technical side of things. I'm not technically, I haven't got the technical mindset, but ultimately it's having the assistance from those teams that are, and obviously they're working with yourselves, and bridging that gap to have everything in one source of data. And ultimately we're still continuing that collaboration and
Yeah.
bringing in, the surveys that we have from our customers within Qualtrics, and attaching them to contact IDs, and I still think there's many things that we can obviously do and bring into Edge Tier itself, which we are obviously talking about. But yeah, it's having
It's
the right
a
team,
It is,
basically.
and it's difficult. And like really common theme we see is that the contact center and the customer service team can sometimes be they can be the poor man when it comes to technical resources within the organization because the tech team is building the website or adding something to the app, and that's where. So we often do a lot of the integration work for our customers. So we'll offer to do the full integration, do the data checks, make sure that we get everything from all the different systems because yeah, I think the system only gets useful when you get a full visibility and you can see, for a single customer, all the different touch points they've had for different channels, what the different sentiment and agent performances across them. That's when you start to get the truly rich, unified view. So yeah, really interesting. Okay, so I think we're ready for Rebecca to come back in now because we're just on time. Um, Rebecca, welcome back. Very smooth transition again.
Thank you.
How
Best
was it in the
first webinar ever.
How was it in
Nice
the
and
wing?
smooth. The wing was a nice place to be. I could observe, I could listen. It was a good place to be. I think we're all back on level playing ground now, as long as my face isn't just a huge face in the middle of the screen.
Yeah,
That's not
all
what I'm
good.
seeing. Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much for that conversation, guys. Really, really interesting to see the before and after at TUI. We've got some time now. We've little around 10 minutes for some questions from the chat that I'll jump into and ask you both. So either of you can jump in if you think you can handle the pressure. I'll go down first to Ashling asks, do you need a big team or someone really technical on your team to pull something like this off? Obviously it's data. Shane, you are a data scientist. Jack, I'm assuming you're not. So did you need a big team to pull this kind of initiative off at TUI?
No, I don't think you need a big team. I mean, we're in a nice position where we had resources, so we were able to bring different areas of the business together to be able to assist and help with obviously what Edge Tier would do technically. But you don't necessarily need a big team to be able to obviously achieve what we have achieved, or achieving, shall I say, present. So yeah, we had a team of say 10 max. And then obviously then we're starting to move into other different areas of what Edge Tier can give us around qualities. Then that brings then another team in, and so depending on what we're looking at would obviously depend on what teams and what skills that we need to bring into that particular remit. But no, you don't necessarily need a big team. We were just in a lucky position, shall I say?
Yeah.
Especially with Shane and his team doing the technical stuff, because we'd still be on day one if it was with me.
Yeah, I think that's a big blocker for some people, thinking you need all this kind of infrastructure in place beforehand, or you need a big tech team or something like that. So it's good to know that's not always needed. Um, Let me jump into Ivona asks, how did you prioritize contact reduction initiatives and what type of tactics did you use? So maybe we said at the beginning that we would maybe give some practical tips, I suppose, not talking specifically about if you were using a specific software. So what kind of initiatives did you put in place, Jack? I know we kind of touched on this a good bit, but say maybe aside from Edge here to reduce that contact.
In terms of topics of what we were looking at, Rebecca, like
Mhm.
topics that we were. So, I mean, when we first started, I mean, you have an idea, right? You have an idea when you're speaking to different people across the business as to potentially what are your pain points. And I mean, you can obviously from there with the use of Edge Tier, we were then obviously tackling initiatives based upon obviously what is the sort of how much is it costing us to start with, and obviously that was the main thing, where we can take that from a how long is it costing us to interact with these customers per minute? How often is this particular topic coming through to us as a business? And then I think from there, obviously, then we have the AHT, so the average handling time of that interaction itself. And obviously from there, it gives you a value. Now, not when we then sort of looked at the initiatives itself, it wasn't always the highest call drivers that we would tackle first. Ultimately, we could have our quick wins and our long-term solutions. And in some cases, we could quick win on 1.5%, but the more you do your quick wins, they then add up to 10%, 11%, and obviously from there, you then obviously then can push on, and in tandem you can look at the long term solution. So you're still gaining whilst you're looking at that big reward at the end. So it would always depend on obviously your deployment. How long is it going to take you to fix? Basically, would depend on how we prioritize our initiatives and what we focus on.
Yeah. Okay. Shane, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Jackson's right. It's like prioritizing a roadmap for development, right? It's what's going to have the biggest impact, weighted by how hard is it to do, weighted by the level of impact it's having on your customers. So yeah, cost really comes down to, right, the cost that it's going to change to fix, along with the cost that you're bearing to just leave that issue alone. I think that's where your point, Jack, tying it back to cost and AHT for each problem. And once you get that nice and granular and accurate, then you can make a real. I suppose it gives you like a very nice, tool to go to your internal teams with and say, well, I need this fixed. And they can say, well, we'll get around to it. But you can say, well, it's driving, X million in cost per week. And that becomes just this inarguable tool rather than, well, we think it's really bad and the customers don't like it. If you're like, well, it's 17,000 calls a week and we're spending X per hour on agents and that's the total cost of Y, that just becomes a much easier argument to have. I think that's that change from hunch-led to data-driven decisions across the organization, where then it becomes the expectation. The next thing you ask for, they're like, well, how big of a problem is it? And you've got this quantification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got that question a couple of times actually from different people in different ways. So thanks for answering that, guys. Probably only have time for about two more now. So Matt asks, if you're still tagging contacts manually, how would you know it's time to move to something more automated? Say you're kind of happy working with the manual tagging. How do you know it's time to move on?
I think it goes
You
back.
can't argue when you're saying you've saved 100,000 hours a year.
Yeah. I mean,
Jack, don't go back.
That's it. Yeah, I might leave the podcast.
It's just that question has convinced you.
No, I mean, I think it goes back to sort of what we mentioned previously around time management and looking back to how much time is it taking you to do your manual contact, and is that time more valuable if you were to replace it and with actionable time. So I think for us was obviously that was our key part and a key element as to obviously the change, because we were spending so much time being able to manually quantify that data, and we weren't spending that time actioning upon the actionable insights. And I think that's a key statement really is you'd rather be actioning rather than filling out Excel sheets, because they can become boring, right? They can become tedious. But yeah, that would be my main point really. It's just spending time more wisely.
Yeah, and on both sides, and for accuracy's sake too, as in if you're using this data to make decisions. I have yet to come across a customer that we ask a question of and they say, yeah, our agents label everything brilliantly. That's just not that's human nature, right? And it's not the circumstance. And you'll always end up, even with our system, like you will end up reading some contacts. And that's why we've introduced, as you mentioned, Jack, the spotlight feature, which I think some people are now doing manually. So our more advanced customers definitely have some of this in place, where they'll take, the transcripts of hundreds of chats and try and like paste them into some large language model. But we've brought that into the system to say like, okay, select 100 conversations or 200 conversations, press one button, and we'll get a large language model to read all 200 of those conversations and tell you what the customers are talking about. And all of that is really around like reduce the amount of time that you have to individually spend reading transcripts and working out what's inside them and trying to spot patterns, because it's so easy to get caught up in one anecdote of, well, I just read a chat where, you know, John didn't get his refund, and then that becomes the story in your mind. Whereas you need to move up that level to and have accurate data to rely on for that.
That's great. One final question to close the discussion off, perhaps a selfish one because it is coming from me, but I have the floor, so I'm going to ask. I feel like this AI has come on really quickly in the last couple of years, and maybe 5 years ago, the average person wasn't hearing about it, but it's everywhere now. So how does that evolve now in the next couple of years? What does this type of tech look like for the industry in the next 3-5 years?
Yeah, a great question. You're right. I think the world is abuzz with this, right? And like I said, I don't want to get overhyped, but there has been a paradigm shift in capabilities here. Things are like fundamentally different, particularly in the areas of understanding text and reading content. And we can see it everywhere, right? The summarization stuff, the reading your emails, the automatic classification. That stuff has both become better and more accurate, which improves what we used to do, but has also become more powerful, allowing us, you know, to do things that just physically were impossible with computers, say like 6 or 7 years ago. So that's kind of unleashed a whole range of new use cases, which is why the industry is so excited, right? For me, I think, and we're working in the area of obviously contact center analytics and conversational analytics. And I think the next step that we're going to see here is much more proactive insights, as in almost imagining your contact center and conversational data as intelligent, and that it has all of these answers hidden within the data. And even though now we have tools where we can go through it really quick and find things, actually some of the stuff that's coming up will almost be as if it's looking through the data itself and coming to you with the answers almost proactively. So I do feel there's huge opportunity there. And I think that's the way we'll see that across lots of our different technology stacks, where it becomes much more proactive and brings the insights to you and says, oh, Jack, I noticed yesterday that, you know, the strike in France has caused a dissatisfaction metric to spike, and you might want to proactively contact everyone who has a booking for that airport tomorrow. And that's just like happening. And you don't have to think about that in advance. It's just coming to you in an alert, or it's coming to you from an intelligent system that understands what's going on. So that's one of the areas that we're probably most excited about here at EdgeTier.
Nice, cool. Well, that brings us right up to time.
Brilliant.
It's the end of today's session. Huge thank you, Jack, for joining us. It was great to hear the insights from TUI. Of course, we know them at EdgeTier, but it's great to share them with everyone else. And thank you, Shane, for joining us. And we hope everyone in the chat is leaving with some inspiration to make some changes like this in their own organizations, and some practical ideas as well. The recording will be going out to everybody, so if you missed anything or need to drop off, don't worry. You'll see that in your inboxes. And of course, if you'd like to continue the conversation with any of us, just reach out.
Thanks so much, Jack. Really enjoyed that.
No problem at all. Thank you very much, all.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.